Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WMATA Special Board Meeting of September 9th, 2021. I'm Paul Smedberg, Chair of the WMATA Board. Before we begin this morning, I'd like to turn to Metro's Chief Safety Officer, Teresa Impastato, to provide us with this morning's safety contact. Ms. Impastato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. National Preparedness Month is an observance each September to raise awareness about the importance of preparing for disasters and emergencies that could happen at any time. The 2021 theme is Prepare to Protect. Preparing for disasters is protecting everyone you love. Begin by making a plan. Talk to your friends and family about how you will communicate before, during, and after a disaster. Make sure to update your plan based on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommendations due to the coronavirus. Then, build a kit. Gather supplies that will last for several days after a disaster for everyone living in your home. Don't forget to consider the unique needs of each person or pet in case you have to evacuate quickly. Update your kits and supplies based upon current recommendations by the CDC. For more information, visit ready.gov. This concludes our safety contact.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Now I'll turn to Ms. Ellison, the Board Corporate Secretary, to please call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Chair Smedberg.
Present.
Vice Chair Babers.
Present.
Vice Chair Slater. Director Letourneau.
Present. Sorry.
Oh, great, thank you. Director Letourneau.
Present.
Alternate Director Bolger.
Present.
Director Drummer.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ellison. First, we'll move to the approval of the agenda. I'd like to move the agenda with the following additions. Today, we'll be swearing in 3 new federal board members and adjusting the board's committee assignments accordingly. I move to approve the agenda with the 2 additional items. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. Now we'll move to the swearing in of the new federal board members. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Sarah Klein, Camila Martin Proctor to the Metro Board of Directors as new principal directors, and Brianne Helfer as a new alternate director representing the federal government. They are filling seats being vacated by Stephen McMillan, Devin Rouse, and Anthony Costa. These new appointees to the board will bring extensive backgrounds not only in transportation, but also policy development and implementation, workforce development, government transparency, and community engagement. I will begin with Ms. Klein. Ms. Klein has spent her career developing and advancing policies to improve transportation outcomes in cities, towns, and rural areas with a specialty in public transit and transit-oriented development. She has led policy development for 2 national nonprofit organizations, Transportation for America and Reconnecting America. Sarah also served as Director of Policy and Government Relations here at WMATA. She has spent 8 years working at the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs as counsel for transit policy, during which time she negotiated the transit provisions of the Safe, Accountable, Flexible, Efficient Transportation Equity Act, a legacy for users. She was a 2010 recipient of the Mass Transit Magazine's Top 40 Under 40 Award. Sarah graduated with a degree in history from Harvard University and received her law degree from Stanford Law School. Ms. Klein, please raise your right hand so I may formally swear you in to your new role. And please repeat it after me. I, Sarah Klein.
I, Sarah Klein.
Do hereby solemnly swear.
Do hereby solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
From which I was appointed.
I'm sorry, I'm having an internet issue.
Okay,
That's
all right.
Can you please repeat?
Yeah, of course. From which I was appointed.
From which I was appointed.
as a principal director of the board
as a principal director of the board
of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office upon which am I about to enter.
of the office upon which I am to enter.
Thank you. And would you like to have this opportunity to say a few words?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I really just want to thank everybody who has worked so hard at Metro over the past year and a half to provide service, keep the buses, trains, paratransit vans running through this time of extremely unprecedented challenges. It's been a tremendous lift for all of you, I'm sure, and I'm just really honored to have the opportunity to join you in this cause, in this mission. I look forward to working with all of you. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome. Now I will address Ms. Martin Proctor. Ms. Proctor currently serves as the 2021 chair of the Washington, D.C. Commission on Persons with Disabilities. In addition, she also serves on the board of the World Institute on Disabilities, a British American Project Fellow, and was the WDC 2020 United State of Women Ambassador. She's the founder of the Martin Multiple Sclerosis Alliance Foundation. Camila served as vice chair on President Obama's National Council on Disability and has worked with the Charles B. Rangel International Affairs Program at Howard University. She has also worked as staff assistant and legislative correspondent for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and is executive assistant to Senator Robert Menendez. She received a BA in political science and an MA in organizational and cultural communication from Howard University. Ms. Martin Proctor, please raise your hand. Please repeat after me. I, Camila Martin Proctor,
I, Camila Martin Proctor,
do hereby solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
from which I was appointed as a principal director of the board
as a principal director of the board
of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
of the Washington Metropolitan Transit Area Authority,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which am I about to enter. Congratulations and welcome, Camila. Would you like to say a few words?
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I am grateful to be in service on this board and on this very critical issue. I want to thank all the employees and the staff that work so hard to keep our buses and trains running. I thank you for your Metro Access program, which I think is critical, the help that you run with regards to the charter buses for DC Public Schools, and the Second Chance program that you also offer that allows individuals previously incarcerated to receive employment. I think these are all wonderful programs, and I am proud to be part of this new adventure.
Well, welcome, and we look forward to working with you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And now we'll address Dr. Helfer. Good morning. Nice seeing you. Dr. Helfer has a long career in public service with a wide range of experiences in transportation industry, including former positions as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Engagement at the United States Department of Transportation, Senior Advisor on Accessible Transportation and Workforce Development at USDOT, Senior Advisor for the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility, and the Director of the Easter Seals Project Action. Other roles include Senior Director of Civic Engagement for the National Academy of Public Administration, the Manager of Strategic Planning for the U.S. Department Accountability Office, and Director of the National Traumatic Brain Injury Technical Assistance Center. Dr. Helfer currently serves as the Assistant County Manager in Arlington County, Virginia, where she leads government-wide communications and public engagement strategy. She has received the USDT Inspiring Leaders Award, the US DOT Secretary of Transportation's Gold Medal and Meritorious Awards, the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials for Women Moving the Nation, and the WTS DC Chapter Rosa Parks Award. She holds a bachelor's degree from Ohio University, a master's degree from George Mason University, and a doctorate from the George Washington University. Dr. Helfer, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Brianne Helfer,
I, Bryna Helfer,
do hereby solemnly swear
do hereby solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
from which I was appointed
from which I was appointed
as an alternate director of the board
as an alternate director of the board
of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office upon which I am about to enter.
of the office of which I am about to enter.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And would you too like to say a few words?
Thank you. I'm honored to serve, honored to be a part of this amazing team and this amazing board. I too want to express my thanks and gratefulness to all of Metro and for the community for sticking with us. Transportation is the link that binds us. It gets us everywhere we need to go. And without it, we couldn't be active in our community. And so I am just really humbled and honored to have this position and to work with all of you. Thank you.
All right, thank you and welcome. Okay, next we'll move on to the approval of the revised committee assignments. With new members appointed to the board, we will need to revise the board's committee assignments to reflect new appointments. I move the following board committee assignments. Joining the Executive Committee, Sarah Klein. The Finance and Capital Committee, Matthew Letourneau, and I will nominate him as chair, and Sarah Klein will also join that committee. Safety and Operations Committee, Colonel Don Drummer as chair, Camila Martin Proctor as vice chair, and me, Paul Smedberg. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau,
Aye.
Mr. Bolger,
Aye.
and Mr. Drummer.
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to also thank Colonel Drummer and Mr. Letourneau for their willingness to step up in leadership roles of those two committees at a very challenging and important time for WMATA in the region. So thank you so much for your willingness to do that. Next, we'll move on to the approval of parking fees and the waiver that has been recommended at the Shady Grove and Rockville stations. Our one item of business today is an administrative action to approve a parking waiver or fee waiver at Shady Grove and Rockville stations during the upcoming Rockville Station canopy replacement project. Waiving the parking fees at Shady Grove and Rockville will allow customers riding Metro easy access to the free shuttle buses that will take them to the Twin Brook station to complete their trips via Metro Rail. This parking waiver fee will be in effect for the duration of the project, which will begin this Saturday, September 11th, and last for approximately 3 months. We appreciate our customers' patience while Metro completes these necessary repairs and upgrades. I'd like to move approval of this item. Is there a second?
Second.
So I hear a second from Mr. Bolger. Is there any discussion or comments? Mr. Secretary or Mr. Drummer, Colonel Drummer, any comments or questions on this?
No comments or questions for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll or conduct the vote.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau,
Aye.
Mr. Bulger,
Aye.
Mr. Drummer,
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. And with no further business to come before the board, we stand adjourned. And again, welcome to our new members. Again, we very much look forward to working with you over the coming months and years. And next, after a brief pause here, we'll move right to the executive committee meeting. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Executive Committee meeting of the WMATA Board, September 9th, 2021. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any comments or objections to the committee or to the agenda as presented? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of our July 29th meeting and executive session before us for approval. Are there any objections or comments to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. Our action item today is the acceptance of 3 reports from our Inspector General. The Executive Committee is responsible for reviewing and accepting the reports from the Inspector General. The committee has reviewed the following reports: the semi-annual report to the Board of Directors, number 28, the audit of WMATA's mission critical legacy systems, and third, the special project report, review of WMATA's COVID-19 response related to social distancing. Before we take a vote, I'd like to turn the table over to Mr. Charrington, our IG, to give us highlights of these reports. Mr. Charrington.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I apologize, my camera is off. I'm having technical difficulties, so if it's okay.
We understand.
Thank you, sir.
I understand, Jeff. Yep.
First, on the semi-annual report to the board, during this reporting period, OIG work resulted in 3 reports of investigation, 1 management alert, 1 management assistance report, 3 special project reports, performance audit that identified weaknesses in WMATA's improper payment program, and an audit of WMATA's Smart Trip Regional Partner comparative billing statements for FYs 2019 and 2020, and WMATA's single audit for FY 2020. We continue to focus our efforts on procurement fraud by conducting contract audits. And during this period, we also issued 24 contract audit reports and 2 Buy America Act audit reports, identifying $800,000 in possible savings. Shall I continue on to the audit, Mr. Chairman?
I'll go ahead and stop here, and let's, Mr. Charrington, let's go ahead and, does anyone have any questions or comments for the IG or his team on this particular report? Okay, hearing none. Go ahead, Jeff, the second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our audit of WMATA's mission critical legacy systems. WMATA had not developed or has incomplete modernization plans for 6 mission critical legacy systems that OIG sampled. The absence of modernization plans could impact WMATA's ability to operate and meet system and mission requirements effectively and efficiently. WMATA agreed with our recommendations and will implement a comprehensive system modernization program by December 31st, 2023. that concludes the briefing on the audit, sir.
Right. Again, any questions or comments for the IG on this second item? Okay, hearing none. Oh, Mr. Bolger.
Jeff, could you just explain in more depth what systems were found to be incapable of operating?
Mr. Boulder, due to the sensitivity of those, I'd be happy to brief you in person. However, we've had to redact those out for the public session in order to maintain security of the system.
Okay.
But sir, you do have those, and I'd be happy to also brief you in more detail in a private session.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, Jeff, last report.
Thank you, sir. At the request of the Board of Directors, we conducted a special project report on WMATA's COVID-19 response related to social distancing. OIG reviewed WMATA's response to COVID-19 as it relates to social distancing and found that WMATA has been responsive in mitigating social distancing risks. Throughout the pandemic, WMATA's COVID-19 response has been with the health and safety of its customers, employees, and contractors at the forefront. Further, WMATA encouraged social distancing for its customers, employees, and contractors, and has provided guidance and tools so that they may be able to make informed decisions. That concludes that briefing, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Charrington. And Mr. Charrington, I think it's fair to say that WMATA, Mr. Wiedefeld and his team have been somewhat of a leader in this area for some of the systems nationwide, and some of them have turned to WMATA for advice in this, or Ms. Imposato.
Yes, sir. We found that they were a leader in this, that they followed strict adherence to the FDA guidelines. And we as OIG were very pleased with the response that they had towards COVID, and also to their influenza task force response that they had initiated in advance of this and were able to utilize to help them get through their response to COVID-19.
Yeah. And Mr. Wiedefeld, I think, is there a current policy in place from FDA in regard to mask wearing and sort of these practices continuing? I believe it is until January, is it?
Yes, it was to, it's actually through the TSA and the CDC, and it was to expire, actually, I believe it was the 12th, Sunday, September 12th. But they have extended it both for transit and aviation. But I think it's important to understand that is where they have some authority to do that. But yeah, transit agencies across the nation, as you know, and particularly here, we have gone above and beyond what you will find in a lot of private locations that people may go to. So I feel much more comfortable getting on our buses and our rail stations than I do in some of the facilities I go into, whether it's a restaurant or some other facility, because I don't know how they clean. I do know how we clean. I do know we have masks. So I think it's important for the public to understand that by extending that mask mandate for transit is not that transit is unsafe, but it's another protection for you. So I think that's very important. So, but yes, that is the law of the land right now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anyone have any comments or questions for Mr. Charrington on this report? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Charrington. Acceptance of these reports constitutes the board's authorization to post them on the WMATA website, provided that the Inspector General has conferred with the General Counsel and has confirmed that any private or confidential information has been removed and or redacted in accordance with applicable law and WMATA policy. I would like to move approval of this item. Is there a second from a committee member?
Second.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. Ms. Ellison, we have a motion and a second. Please call.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. These reports have been accepted and the Inspector General has been authorized to post them online. Thank you, Mr. Charrington. With no further business to come before this committee, we will stand adjourned. Now we'll move to the Finance and Capital Committee meeting, and I'll turn the floor over to that committee's new chairman, Mr. Letourneau, to begin that meeting after, or do we just roll right into it, Jennifer?
Yes, sir, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the September 9th meeting of the Finance and Capital Committee. I'll just start by saying I appreciate the confidence of the board in selecting me to chair this committee. I am the chairman of the Loudoun Board's Finance Committee, so now I get to pull a little bit of double duties, but certainly Metro has some challenges given revenue and ridership and sort of what we know about federal funding and how it will run out around 23. So I know this committee will do a lot of good work to do the best we can to keep the system running and make some sound fiscal decisions. So our first order of business at our committee meeting today is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. We also must approve our minutes. We have the minutes of the July 29th meeting before us for approval. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll also consider the minutes approved as presented. We have two items on our agenda. The first is an amendment to the FY21 operating budget to reflect budget changes due to collective bargaining agreements related to the CPI, recognition of the Juneteenth federal holiday, and the Potomac Yard Metro Rail Station opening delays to fall 22. Next, we'll receive a briefing about the planning work and status of the blue, orange, silver capacity and reliability study. Staff will also review the study process and the next steps in the identification of a locally preferred alternative. And I know this is an item that's been underway for quite some time and has received quite a bit of interest in the public and the media, so I'm sure we'll have some good questions on that topic. So moving to our first item, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Dennis Nsike, our CFO, to begin today's presentations. Mr. Nsike.
Good morning, Mr. Letourneau.
Morning.
And members of the board. My name is Dennis Nsike, Chief Financial Officer for Metro. Mr. Chairman, can you see my slides?
We can see your slides. I'm getting just a little bit of feedback in the background. I'm not sure if others are hearing that. So I think if everybody just make sure you mute while Dennis is speaking.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned already, Mr. Chairman, our goal today is to update the committee on 3 contingent expenses associated with changes in the Consumer Price Index, the Juneteenth federal holiday, and the Potomac Yard station construction that will impact FY22 operating budget, and then request committee amendment of the FY22 operating budget using additional federal relief funds in order to hold jurisdictional contributions at existing levels. The CBA with Local 689 and 922 are linked to year-over-year CPI-W adjustments. On June 10th, 2021, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics published the May CPI-W of 5.6%, which means that members of both unions that do additional 3.1% wage adjustment higher than the 2.5% contained in the FY22 approved budget. Some non-represented supervisors and managers will also be impacted by this wage adjustment, in addition to FOP members whose salary is based on other jurisdictional salary increases, but that one is due in October of this year. On this slide, It shows that the 5.6% increases will increase contract cost for local 689 and 922 members by $20.9 million in FY 2022, which you see on the last column, which the CBA total line of $20.855 million. As I mentioned earlier, it will also result in an additional $2.5 million increase to address compression for managers and supervisors of union employees, for a total expected impact of $23.4 million for the year. On June 17, 2021, President Biden signed legislation making Juneteenth a federal holiday, which impacts Metro's operating revenues and expenses. Revenues were roughly $734,000 lower from reduced ridership and charging off-peak fares on June 19, 2021. On the other hand, expenses grew by $1.7 million due to increased overtime compensation for employees who worked the holiday based on collective bargaining agreement, for an overall impact in FY22 of $2.5 million. As you also mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the construction delay associated with Potomac Yard Station is causing staff to recommend that both the revenues and expenses budgeted to operate the station in FY22 be removed. Revenues in this case was expected revenues was $2,000 and expenses of $576,000, resulting in a net adjustment of $474,000. The net summary of the changes that I discussed in prior slide is an $800,000 decrease in revenues, a $24.5 million increase in expenses, no increases in operating subsidy, and a $25.5 million increase in federal relief utilization. With that, Mr. Chairman, we recommend committee amendment of the fiscal year 22 operating budget to cover these additional expenses using federal relief funds and without additional impact to the jurisdictions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Anasike. Let's go ahead and get a motion on the table on this first, and then we'll go around for questions. Can a member of the committee move approval of the item? All right, I'll move approval of the item. Can I have a second from a member of the committee?
This is Sarah Klein. I second the motion.
Thank you. Seconded by Ms. Klein. What we'll do is our practice, I'll start with members of the committee who have questions and comments, and then open it up to the rest of the board. Maybe to kick us off, Dennis, 2 questions. So what does what does this do for our FY24 operating budget gap? Is there a new adjusted number that you can provide us with what that looks like with these changes?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can provide you that number. As you anticipate, these changes will be incorporated in the base budget, which will also be impacting both FY23 and FY24.
Okay. Maybe you can just follow up then with what that new number looks like for us. And then another question, the materials state that an additional adjustment or CBA adjustment is expected in October for our police officers at MTPD based on their FOP contract. And that's apparently based on jurisdictional salary increases. Is that something that's budgeted already in our FY22 budget, or is that also an unbudgeted expenditure for us that we were not anticipating?
Mr. Chairman, we actually anticipate that, but it's currently unbudgeted. The issue is that we do not know exactly how much that will be. And so in the past, we've historically used a other adjustments within the budget itself to address that. So at this point, we don't know precisely what that number will be, if any. And so,
can you explain just how that works exactly then?
Yes, sir. The CBA agreement with FOP requires that WMATA compensate its officers based on the highest three jurisdictional, the salaries of the highest three jurisdictional forces in the area. So, and that comes in October. So we will engage in that analysis over the next few months and then come back to the board to the extent there's an adjustment to be made, and also look within the budget to address that.
Is that the next three highest in the transit area specifically?
That's correct.
So does not include federal law enforcement and things like that, or does it?
I do not believe so.
Okay. Okay, and we'll get that probably next month.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me open it up to others that have questions. Please use the raised hand feature. So I'll just pause for a second, see if any members of the Finance Committee have any questions. Seeing none so far, I will go to Mr. Bulger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dennis, the dedicated funding that was passed in the three jurisdictions had a 3% cap. How does the CBA relate to the 3% cap on dedicated funding?
Mr. Borgia, the budget that the board authorized relies on the 3% funding for the annual contribution, the base 3% funding for annual contributions to the budget. So the budget is designed to live within that construct. I don't know if that answers your question.
Not really, Dennis. So is the CBA outside of the 3% dedicated funding cap?
No, it's not.
So it's inside of the cap?
Yes.
Meaning something else is going to have to get cut, right?
Well, I think we're lucky this year. The organization is fortunate to have additional resources, but that also eats into what could be used in the out years.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to clarify where the 3% dedicated funding cap relates to the CBA. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, Tom, if I might just follow up on your line of questioning, maybe Dennis would, to sort of get at Tom's question, if we did not have a large pool of federal funds to cover
Right.
this difference, what would we be doing
Right.
to cover that?
So, Mr. Chairman, that's really the fundamental question. And if you recall that in the last collective bargaining process, WMATA worked really hard to try to convince the arbitrator that this is going to be a perennial problem for the organization, given the uncertainties surrounding these kinds of conversations. So if this happens in the future, this will be something that the region will have to confront with.
So Matt, many meetings ago, you raised the concern about Richmond and Annapolis, et cetera, in the district. So I think we should put this in the list of the 3% cap is somewhat unrealistic sometimes when we have these CBA increases, which are twice as much as the cap, almost twice as much as the cap.
Yes, but I think, Dennis, it's fair to say this is fairly unusual because we don't typically see CPI jump up like this so quickly, right?
You're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. Historically this is a once in a while occurrence, but it does happen.
Yeah. Okay. I thought I saw Mr. Slater's hand up briefly. Greg, did you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick. I just wanted to understand on the holiday edition, do we consider in future years the potential for some celebrations in DC, those types of things that could mean that we would, even though it is a federal holiday, that we would need to provide service?
Yes, Secretary Slater. In the future, and depending on how the pandemic plays, we expect that there will be more celebrations and more activities requiring even more service. Which will hopefully also produce additional revenues. But based on the current experience, we'll share the numbers with the board, but in the future, we expect the numbers to change accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my only question.
Thank you, Mr. Slater. Any other questions on this item? All right, seeing none, I will conduct a roll call vote. Vice Chair Slater.
Aye.
Ms. Klein.
Aye.
Ms. Babers.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So,
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
okay, thank you, Jennifer. All right, let's move on to our next item, which is the Blue Orange Silver Capacity and Reliability Study update. I believe we're welcoming Mr. Tom Webster to lead this discussion, and also Mr. Wiedefield. Are you kicking it off for us? And Mr.
If I
Phillips?
may,
Paul.
Chairman. Yeah, just before I turn it over to Tom and his team.
Absolutely.
Okay. Again, today we're here to provide an update on the Blue Orange Silver Capacity and Reliability Study. Prior to starting the third round of public, stakeholder, and elected official engagement. It's really important to know that there is no staff or regional recommendation today, and no project has been selected at this stage of the study. I think that's very, very important that people understand that. This is just another step in many steps along the way to advance a regional solution as we follow the federal guidelines complete with, again, extensive public, stakeholder, and elected official engagement. And this process will eventually support the board's action for consideration and selection of regionally, locally preferred alternative in the future, which is, again, a little bit of the jargon of the process that we have to go through. As you know, this process started, as you mentioned, quite a while ago in 2019, before the pandemic, to address longstanding issues with the corridor, including obviously reliability, crowding, and other service issues dealing with this regarding the sharing of the tracks there. While the changes in travel demand for the pandemic are not clear, we do know that based on jurisdictional and regional projections, that there will be a significant growth in this corridor. That's why we want to continue with this effort in studying it. And growth is great. It's fantastic. We all want it, but we also have to realize the pressures that we'll put on our system going in this, particularly this bottleneck. So again, this study is to identify some of the potential solutions and eventually reach some sort of point of a decision on those. So now we'll get into the nuts and bolts of this. It's a process that I think we all need to understand, both the public and obviously the board. But for the public to understand, this is a long process. These are very expensive projects. You're competing in effect nationally, potentially for federal dollars. So it's important that we follow the process to the T. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom and Mark Phillips for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefield, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Tom Webster. I'm Metro's Executive Vice President for Strategy Planning and Program Management. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Mark Phillips, who's the Senior Planner and the lead for this study effort. Mark will be giving the presentation this morning. So Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, Chair Letourneau and members of the board. And thank you for allowing me this opportunity to provide you a status update and update or catch up on the current work to date on the Blue Orange Silver Corridor Capacity and Reliability Study, or BOS study, prior to that next round of public and stakeholder engagement. I'll briefly talk about the study purpose, the transit challenges that we face in the Blue Orange Silver Corridor, how we identified a range of alternatives, and then how we narrowed that down to a current set of alternatives for your consideration, as well as the next steps of moving towards that preferred corridor solution. I do want to take a moment just briefly to pause and talk about my use of the word we occasionally in this presentation. In almost every case, I'll use that. It's not just referring to Metro staff or our consultants. This study has been informed by several stakeholder committees, as well as a lot of public feedback and input. So it's a much larger we that extends past the boundaries of the WMATA organization. The study was launched in 2019 to identify the best and most cost-effective solutions to several long-standing and serious issues that have impacted service in this corridor, notably ridership and crowding at the peak hours, our capacity constraints in meeting that ridership demand, reliability issues, and other service needs. The intent is to identify a range of options for your consideration in selecting a preferred solution that can move on into future project development and environmental review in the federal process that would address these solutions in the most cost-effective and most impactful manner. We're at the point now where we do need to go back out to engage elected officials, additional stakeholders, and the public. So we wanted to provide this update before that. Just to provide a little bit more detail on these transit challenges, the GM noted that this corridor, these 3 lines, have had crowding issues during the peak hours for many years before the COVID pandemic, and our jurisdictional partners are forecasting growth of around 37% population and 30% jobs in 2-mile area around these 3 lines. That growth is great, but it's likely to increase ridership and that peak hour crowding. But because we run these 3 lines through one tunnel instead of tracks between the Potomac and Anacostia rivers, we don't have the ability to run or operate enough trains to meet that level of demand. Similarly, because we do have this interlining situation with the 3 lines, if there's a delay on one line, it impacts service on the other 2. So we also need to look at options for ensuring or increasing reliability and ensuring good on-time performance. Thanks to our dedicated funding passed by our jurisdictional partners, we also have the ability to advance our capital program and start addressing our backlog of state of good repair needs. But it does mean for the foreseeable future, we'll have work zones and other construction activities, as well as the kind of disruptions that will come up on a routine basis, regardless of how well we're doing with the state of good repair, like police activity and fire activity. So we also want to look at infrastructure options and service strategies that minimize the customer service impacts and the geographic extent of those disruptions and work zones. We did talk about the crowding issues and the high level of demand we have in some segments, some stations and line segments in this corridor, but there are other stations and line segments that are actually underutilized, where the ridership really isn't high enough to hit the fare box recovery targets we would like. So we also want to look at options of generating new ridership and new revenue through transit development and attracting new riders to those lines and line segments, as well as building in the ability to match service to demand with flexible service patterns. Finally, any project that we advance through this should address or further Metro's and the region's goals for sustainability and equity. So that's a brief high-level overview of the challenges that we're facing in this quarter and have been for many years. We worked with our stakeholder committees, the jurisdictional stakeholder committees, to translate those issues into 4 goal statements that the LPA or the preferred solution identified by this board should attain. Goal 1 is providing sufficient capacity to meet that ridership demand and crowding without crowding. Goal 2 is to improve our reliability and on-time performance. The 3rd goal is to improve our operational flexibility and cost efficiency. And the 4th is to support sustainable development, sustainable transit service, and expand access to opportunity. I do want to pause here and note that these 4 goal statements, as simple as they sound, are at the very heart of the Blue Orange Silver study and have informed all of the work we've done to date. They were the basis for identifying an initial set of options. They were used to screen those options down to the set of 6 alternatives that we'll be discussing and presenting today, and they should be used to select that preferred solution. Speaking of that preferred solution or locally preferred alternative, it's likely to be a relatively large-scale project, and we wanted to make sure that that project could compete for federal funding. So we aligned the Blue Orange Silver study process with the Federal Transit Administration's process requirements for federal grant opportunities. And if you look at that timeline on the lower half of the slide, you'll see that a major capital project can take 10 to 20 years or more to deliver, and that the Blue Orange Silver study and identification of the locally preferred alternative is just the first step in that very long process. It's also important to note that there is no commitment to build or deliver a project until there is a funding agreement with the federal government and between the region itself. Until that point, Metro can stop work if over the next several years we find that the ridership hasn't recovered or rebuilt enough that we'll have these crowding capacity problems by 2040. And that funding agreement is several years away after the project development and preliminary engineering phases. The study itself has followed another federal guideline or federal guidance on an alternatives analysis process under NEPA, which I'm sure most people here are familiar with. It started off with the identification of those 4 goal statements, the problems in the corridor, and translating those to the 4 goal statements. Then we moved to developing that full range of options, an initial set that we thought that the project team and our stakeholders thought would attain those 4 goals. And then we got a lot of input from those stakeholders and from the public at meetings and surveys to narrow that full universe of options to a final set of alternatives discussed today. And we ran those through a cost-benefit analysis or an alternative evaluation, again, with a lot of stakeholder input. And that's where we are today. We finished the cost-benefit analysis on these 6 alternatives to be discussed. Now we have to go back out to the public, engage stakeholders, engage elected officials, and come back to you with that information and support your choice, your decision for that preferred alternative or that the solution, the corridor solution. Just briefly, this slide kind of gives you an idea of how much public and stakeholder engagement has been done. To date, I mentioned the stakeholder committees that have provided guidance and input on this project for the entire, on this study for the entire length of the study. We have 2 jurisdictional committees, one of technical staff and one of leadership, and the same at Metro. We have a technical and a leadership committee there. We've also engaged business and community-based organizations, held public meetings, and ran an online survey that got over 2,000 responses. All that input provided that initial universe of 275 project ideas that we then were able to use the study goals, stakeholder feedback, and some additional technical analysis to narrow down to 16 project concepts that were then screened down to the 6 alternatives presented today. I just want to reinforce the note that the GM mentioned at the beginning, as well as Tom, that we do have these 6 alternatives for your consideration that we will be discussing with the public, but none of them should be viewed as a recommendation for that solution or that locally preferred alternative. That LPA needs a lot more public participation and stakeholder engagement before we can have that conversation with the board. And that solution may be one of the 6 alternatives shown today, or it could be a combination of components from different alternatives. This slide just gives
Hey, Mark, I don't want to interrupt too much, but just on that last point, because I think this is important as you go through the rest of these. Sorry, my cordless phone is yelling at me. The combination of components from different alternatives, how exactly would that sort of be formulated or constituted? Because you're going to go out and sort of show these 6 things, and I suspect that most of the recipients of those presentations are sort of going to be thinking, okay, these are the 6 things we have to choose from. But what would the process be to kind of take bits and pieces if that's what we wanted to do?
I think definitely with the board and with the stakeholders, we'll have to figure out how to do this with the public in a smart and easy way for them to understand. But for instance, with something like the rail alignments that you're about to see, it could be a matter of showing which section of which segment performs best on the Virginia side, which segment performs best on Maryland, and kind of see if there's a way to recombine those into a more effective and more cost-effective option. We also have a lower capital cost alternative that has several components, such as bus rapid transit, commuter routes, and rail turnbacks. And it might mean taking 1 or 2 components from that and combining it with a Metro Rail alternative so that we can have like a starter project that addresses some of the immediate needs while also keeping an eye on the long term.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead. I just wanted to clarify that before you showed them, just so we're all thinking that way when we look at them.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. This slide gives you a kind of a relational overview of how the sites compare in terms of cost, benefits, and impacts. The first alternative is always part of a process like this. It's the no build. And that isn't necessarily the system we have today, but the system that is planned and funded by 2040 by the jurisdictions and through the TPB long range plan and our own capital improvement program. That is, it includes the Silver Line Phase 2, the Potomac Yard, our State of Good repair projects in our CIP, as well as funded jurisdictional projects such as the Purple Line. Stepping up in terms of cost, benefits, and impacts, we do have that lower capital cost alternative that I just mentioned, which tries to attain the 4 study goals at a lower cost than a new rail line. And this includes a fairly large package of enhanced bus service, dynamic rail scheduling, expansions to our core stations, building up the potential opportunity to do more train turnbacks so that we can have that variable service pattern, as well as looking for opportunities to expand passenger carrying capacity in our rail cars. Finally, stepping up to the highest benefit, highest impact, but also highest cost alternatives, we do have 4 potential realignments of the metro system, including new stations, new lines, expanded capacity, and new rail access. This slide in the map just shows you the no-build scenario, which everyone here is familiar with. It's the existing system plus Silver Line Phase 2 in Potomac Yard. I just want to pause here and point out that peak service plan graphic over on the left. This just indicates that our planning horizon for the study is 2040. So aligned with some of the assumptions in the regional long-range plan, as well as our own rail fleet plan, we're assuming that by that point we would have 6-minute peak service. And this is the service assumption across all of the alternatives for 2040. And I will also note that this is a relatively conservative approach in that it looks at the impacts of the maximum utilization of our existing system. The next alternative is that lower capital cost alternative I mentioned. It's at 6 bus rapid transit lines, 3 between DC and Northern Virginia and 3 between DC and Maryland, as well as 54 commuter routes on both sides of the rivers. Includes that dynamic rail scheduling, the core station improvements, turn back capacity, although that is a voluntary choice on the board's end, as well as rail car capacity improvements. The first Metro Rail line realignment would be realigning the blue to Greenbelt by building a second Roslyn station that would have a direct pedestrian connection to the existing Roslyn station, and then building a new tunnel up to M Street in Georgetown, along M Street to Union Station, and then head northeast to the Ivy City, Port Towns areas before coming up to Hyattsville and Greenbelt. And I do want to note that we at least are assuming at the beginning at this stage in the study that that would be a separate track instead of stations to avoid re-interlining on the green and yellow. The second new Metro Rail line would be another realignment of the blue line at that second Roslyn station. It would follow the same pathway through Georgetown and downtown DC around M Street to Union Station, but from Union Station would turn south and serve from some fast-growing areas targeted for development, like the Navy Yard, Buzzard Point, St. Elizabeth's, and National Harbor before crossing the river back to Alexandria. The third option creates a completely new tunnel that separates the Silver Line at West Falls Church through a second Roslyn station. So this would actually completely separate, de-interline the Silver Line across its entire corridor by building that new tunnel, going to a second Roslyn station, and then again going through downtown DC and then heading northeast through Ivy City and Port Towns to Greenbelt. I do want to note that this wouldn't get rid of or destroy the existing connection between the Silver Line and the current Orange and Silver Line tunnel. So this means that this would give Metro the flexibility to operate all express service or a mix of local and express service. We can send some Silver Line trains down this new tunnel. We could also send some into the existing tunnel and provide that local service through Arlington.
Hey, Mark, on that one, so it's showing like almost a parallel new Silver Line. Where is that something that would run above ground, parallel to 66, or have we not gotten that far?
The assumption at this moment is that it would be below ground.
It would be below ground. The whole thing would be a tunnel.
Yes.
Essentially under the existing track.
Yes, sir.
Got it. Okay.
And the final new Metro Rail line would be another realignment of the Silver from Clarendon and a second Roslyn station through downtown DC to Union Station. From there, it would travel northeast to the Ivy City area again, but instead of going to Greenbelt, it would turn down the Annapolis Road, Route 50 to New Carrollton. So those are the 6 alternatives that are currently under consideration that we've done this cost-benefit analysis on, and that we will be taking out to the public and showing these results. Just really quickly, I want to describe the cost-benefit analysis is based off of 14 performance measures that are all related to those 4 goals I mentioned. Each goal has around 3 to 4 performance measures associated with it. Each alternative received a score on its performance relative to those metrics that are shown here from kind of on the lower end to the higher end. And this is, I want to note, a relative scale. So this is not to scale showing the performance, just high to low, how they ranked up. However, knowing that a project needs to think about cost effectiveness and the value of the impacts and benefits for the dollar spent, we divided the total benefit score by the annualized project cost, including the capital construction costs as well as the annual O&M costs, and came up with a cost effectiveness score. When you look at the performance and benefits and cost effectiveness, that new blue line to National Harbor offers the highest impacts and the highest benefits, while the lower capital cost alternative would have the fewest benefits, but we believe could still meet that 2040 need and achieve the 4 goals. But when you factor cost into it, the lower capital cost alternative emerges as the highest score, the best score, whereas the new blue line to National Harbor is the second most cost effective, and that new Silver Line Express tunnel becomes the least cost effective. I do want to note before I move on to the table below it, that some of the reasons the new blue line to National Harbor scores well in benefits is because it serves a lot of areas that don't have high capacity transit today and expands a lot of access in equity areas, as well as serving areas targeted for growth and development. The lower capital cost alternative, we do believe has been designed to meet that 2040 need and achieve the 4 goals. It does do so at a much lower price tag than any of the rail alternatives. But I do want to caution that it was designed to meet that 2040 goal. It would not help future-proof capacity to meet ridership demands past 2040. And it also relies on the jurisdictional partners to do a lot of transit priority treatments on their streets, as well as people voluntarily shifting from Blue, Orange, and Silver rail line service in the peak hour to bus rapid transit and commuter route service. It's designed to take that many people off of the rail lines so that we can address the crowding issues. And finally, the table below this on the slide presents some selected metrics in addition to the CBA for net new weekday trips to the system, that the fare revenue that would be generated, as well as ranges of our capital cost estimates and annual O&M cost. And you'll see here, as I mentioned, the lower capital cost has an estimated project cost or capital cost of around 0 to 5 billion, whereas the rail alignments go from 15 to 20 or 20 to 25. So that's the results of the cost benefit analysis. And the next steps to get to that preferred solution are to go out to the public. We're going to be briefing elected officials and boards this fall, having a 3rd round of public engagement with public meetings and online survey and other feedback tools. And then we'll be coming back to this board with that information, as well as figuring out some way to structure that conversation that will help you decide and identify that preferred solution. And now, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, and I am finished with the presentation and open to questions.
Okay. Let me open it up for questions. This is not an action item today. This is our first look at this, and so I anticipate it'll be in front of the committee for a while. But let me open it up to questions. Ms. Babers?
First of all, thank you, Mark, for the presentation and for the work your team has done.
Thank you.
When I know that this started pre-pandemic, and that it does not assume to actually whatever selection that is made is not until like 2040. But did the study, once the pandemic happened and we saw what happened as a result of ridership during the pandemic, and even though I know that there is a hope and thought that we will get not only back to pre-pandemic ridership levels, but will continue to grow, were there any adjustments made in the study to account for perhaps more long-term telework, such that ridership doesn't quite go the way we think it may go?
Thank you for the question, Madam Board Member. That's a fantastic question, and I'll say we have not actually adjusted the ridership analysis or to adjust for impacts to telework or COVID, only because we don't believe that there is yet a reliable and longitudinal source for that type of data. Like the region is still recovering. We're still trying to figure out exactly how and when people will go back to work. You might remember that I showed that slide that shows the long federal process for project delivery. We will be keeping an eye on this ridership data, and I just want to reiterate that even once we identify this preferred solution or LPA, it's only the first step in that really long process. So over the next 5 years to 10 years, we will be keeping an eye on ridership, and if at that point it becomes obvious that we won't have those crowding issues, then we can take another path, or we can even stop work.
Okay, and then one more question. For the low capital cost alternative, what was the assumption for any Virginia congestion that would impact the buses, since we're talking about more buses?
Thank you. That's also a very good question. The overall design of the bus rapid transit and commuter routes was the intention there is to take enough people off of the rail lines to reduce the crowding, the peak hour crowding below our service standards. So that's how we came up with the routing and the number of vehicles crossing the river that would be required. In terms of the congestion on the roads, we made assumptions about what kind of bus priority measures would need to be in place, like traffic signal priority, bus lanes, et cetera. And we did work with the stakeholder groups, those committees that I mentioned, to flesh that out for each of the individual jurisdictions. It's still at this point a high level conceptual treatment that would also, like, if that ended up being the preferred solution, that kind of detail would be part of the project development process that is the next stage. We assume that kind of priority treatment, but we cannot guarantee it. Those would be jurisdictional projects.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, I'll jump in with a few then. So, Mr. Slater, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few. I feel like I have a lot of kind of technical and financial questions, but I think at this point in the process, I'll kind of save those and ask more process questions. So I'd like to understand, Mark, first, thank you for all the work in the presentation, but I want to understand the process that we're in, because I think it started before my tenure on the board. So I'd like to understand, is this a NEPA process with FTA? Is this just a higher level planning process? And just kind of understand that. And then, depending on where that answer is, I might have a couple more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Board Member. I appreciate the question. And I think the best way to answer that is to call this a pre-NEPA alternatives analysis that is in alignment with federal requirements for NEPA. I won't go into too much detail, but ever since the FTA, the federal government imposed a 2-year deadline or timeline on the project development process and on NEPA, any transit agency that's looking at a major project really has to do a lot of advanced work before actually starting the formal NEPA process. So that's what this is. This is that alternatives analysis that will then take us into NEPA and project development. But it is in alignment. We designed it particularly in alignment with NEPA requirements and guidelines, as well as, I don't know if you're familiar, but DOT guidance on planning environmental linkages studies.
Yes, I'm very familiar with those guidelines, but just a couple of kind of thoughts there. The one, if we get to the point as a board that we're selecting a preferred alternative, officially NEPA will be the process that will officially select that alternative. So I just want to make sure there's no conflict there. But two, I just wanted to kind of understand kind of where we were and what we would have to go through, even if the board selected a preferred alternative in 2022. We'd kind of have to go back and go through a lot of those processes again.
I think that under the PEL process, a lot of this work will count as the scoping work, but yes, we would still have to absolutely do NEPA. And it might well take more than that 2-year project development timeline. Yes, sir.
Just my one final question, and then I'll point you back to the regs, because I believe that 2-year timeline regulation has been repealed by the Biden administration, so you might want to look at that. But has there been any engagement with the MPO on this at all?
We actually have members of both staff and leadership of the Transportation Planning Board on the stakeholder committees. So yes, they've been involved in the project across the full timeline.
Great, thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Slater, I think they've said they're going to, but I don't believe they actually have yet, in terms of the issuance of a new rule. But anyway, Ms. Klein.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. This has been a really, really helpful presentation, especially for someone coming into it at this stage. I just have a couple of quick questions. One is, I know that all of the jurisdictions have their own various plans for transit-oriented development, growth into activity centers or regional activity centers, et cetera. Prince George's County in particular recently announced a Blue Line focused transit-oriented development initiative. And I'm wondering if your study has taken into account, like, does it assume that the investments that Prince George's County is planning to make happen, and are those residential and potential ridership impacts reflected in the analysis that you've done, or is that sort of a separate process?
Thank you for the excellent question, Madam Board Member. They are actually included in that. All of the assumptions, all of the land use assumptions in the model that we used are based off the cooperative forecasts provided by the jurisdictions and actually created by the jurisdictions. So to the degree that those master plans and corridor studies and transit-oriented development studies are included in their own forecasts, then yes, they're included in our population employment analysis, as well as the ridership impact and land use impacts analysis. We also did take a closer look at potential development impacts for each of these alternatives, and we're cognizant of the comprehensive plans and the corridor studies, but the underlying projections are completely from those cooperative forecasts by the jurisdictions.
Thank you. And my second question is, I take it, so WMATA is leading this study, although obviously in partnership with a number of other stakeholders. Does that suggest that WMATA would be the manager of the project all the way through? I know that in recent years, some of the more significant capital projects have been handled by other entities. I don't know if that's a question that comes much later in the process, but I'm curious about the thoughts there.
I think it's both, that the formal answer will come later in the process. At this point in the study, because the problems and the likely solutions cross jurisdictional boundaries or the state boundaries, and because they would touch metro assets or would be metro assets that we would actually operate, it made sense for us to be the project sponsor at this point and the project sponsor for the initial federal process. I don't know if that will change in the future, but it made sense for this approach.
And one final question, if I may. At what point does a project officially have to enter there is a moment at which the federal process is entered for their capital investment grants program. What moment is that, and are we before that moment?
We are most definitely before that moment. It's called a request to entry project development, and there's no formal time at which a project sponsor can make that request, but the FTA does have guidelines about what kind of information you need to present and what kind of answers you have to be able to give them to make that request, as well as, and I don't know if that 2-year limit will change. I know there was just some conversation about that, but at the moment, if that 2-year limit is true, because you would have to finish NEPA and all the project development work and get your LPA adopted into the regional long range plan, that 2-year process just doesn't work. The average timeline right now to finish NEPA is 4.1 years. So unless that 2-year requirement changes, we have to do a fair amount of work before actually requesting the start of project development. But once you make that request to FTA and they approve it, that is the beginning of the formal federal process.
Thank you very much. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from members of the board? So I have a couple. One of them is, so the feedback that we've been getting kind of initially from the Virginia jurisdictions is maybe a little surprise. Obviously, many of them have been part of this process leading up, but this kind of concept has sort of colloquially been referred to as the Roslyn Tunnel study. But most of what we're looking at here goes well beyond the Roslyn Tunnel and includes sort of major expansion of the entire system at price tags that are probably many times what we were sort of anticipating. And I think that's probably less true for the staff that's been involved in this process, but it's definitely true, I think, for the elected officials. There's been a lot of interest in this in the General Assembly. potential, future expansion on the Virginia side and so on, and understanding that there needed to be something to address Roslyn Tunnel capacity in order for any of this to really work. And even, as we begin, hopefully soon, phase 2 of Silverline, and understanding that we may have problems even there operating Silverline to its full capacity given the capacity constraints. So with all that in mind, are there ways to potentially sort of narrow the focus here? Now, I understand you can't simply just add tunnel capacity because you're going to have bottlenecks elsewhere. But, could there be a scenario in which, and it kind of gets to what Sarah was just asking, the Commonwealth of Virginia, for instance, may want to, or we may lobby them to take over construction on a portion of this to just specifically address that capacity issue. Can we sort of can we have an alternative that kind of narrows the scope a little bit and just looks at that singular kind of problem?
Mr. Chair, that is a relatively complicated question with an even more complicated answer, because there's the practical answer and then the process answer. The practical answer is that the core capacity constraint, I should say the crowding, is really, as you know, Courthouse to Roslyn, sometimes Foggy Bottom, right? By 2040, if we can't fix the interlining issue, that will expand westward and it will expand eastward. So it starts to impact a much larger portion of the system. But interlining itself isn't just the Roslyn Tunnel, it's the entire tunnel between the Potomac and the Anacostia. So there's two issues with just addressing Roslyn Tunnel. One is that if that alternative is a rail alignment rather than that lower capital cost option, we have to have somewhere to berth and turn the trains, like another rail yard or at least some sort of other facility where we can have rail yard functions. And there's really no good location for a new rail yard anywhere in the core. So we kind of made the assumption that any new rail alternative has to connect to an existing rail yard that we could expand, but the siting of a new one would be pretty impossible. There's also the issue that if we just circumvented the Roslyn Tunnel, but re-interlined on the existing corridor, we would just shift that interlining constraint further east. Now, if we reconnected a line further on the east side, maybe like east of Union Station, where the crowding capacity issues aren't so bad, we would still have the interlining, but it might not have the same crowding constraints, the same crowding, might not result in the same kind of crowding. The problem with that, again, is that sufficient for the future, or is that just a 2040 issue, and would it actually take care of the crowding? I can't answer that today. Process-wise, I think it would become problematic for the FTA, and I don't know if this is a big problem or a small problem, because we worked with the stakeholder groups to identify those 4 goals, and if we then narrow the scope of the solution to only address the capacity issue but don't address the other 3 goals, I think that would be problematic for the federal process, but it would take a smarter person than me to answer that for sure.
Yeah, it's just, when you start floating projects that have $20+ billion price tags, they become sort of so impossible that I worry, momentum won't be there. And we are kind of in a moment now where there is a focus on infrastructure. There is the potential, hopefully soon, for federal funding becoming available. States are going to be getting some of it. And there is some momentum, at least on the Virginia side, to do something here while we have this moment. Obviously, the Long Bridge is a major focus, but this has always kind of been, particularly for the jurisdictions, a big focus. And I don't want to sort of miss that moment by, shooting so big that, we never get there. So that's just kind of my thought process right now. And I'll, kind of a little bit of the initial feedback that we've gotten over the last week or so as this has kind of come out. And I don't know if Chairman Smedberg wants to add anything to that, but I think that's kind of a consensus sort of view from what we've been hearing. So we can kind of work with that and maybe work to sort of look at some of these hybrid alternatives and things like that. But that's kind of where I'm at. Paul, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree with what you said, Matt, and I know that is the consensus of a lot of people, not only in Virginia but around the region as well. Thinking about the system, with some of the immediate issues we've got to deal with. But I do have a question, in relation to that, that sort of existing bottleneck. Just sort of a simple, why can't we have a tunnel that just goes right along the existing tunnel and hooks up over somewhere in Georgetown or Foggy Bottom area? Why is that not on the table? Something like that.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I believe it's the answer would be similar to the issue of not having space for a rail yard or some sort of like stub line, tail tracks where we could turn around the train. But more to the point about the 4 goals, it depends on how far east we land as to whether we actually take care of the corridor capacity constraints. And part of the problem, I think, with just ending or stubbing it in Georgetown would be that if I would assume in that case it would be the blue line, then we wouldn't be serving the primary destination points that blue line riders are going to. So we might take the blue line out of the tunnel, but in that case, we would just have transit riders who are going downtown to like the McPherson Square area and the Metro Center. They would just be transferring to orange and silver, and we might not actually take care of the crowding issue.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to get some of that on the record. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Bulger, I saw you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, thank you for this excellent presentation. Just anecdotally, I've been involved in a lot of new starts. My general question is, the stubbing point has always been, in my history, has been environmental. In the process that you just took us through, are there any big environmental issues that the board needs to know about?
Thank you for that excellent question, Mr. Board Member. At the moment, we haven't done a full environmental assessment. That comes in the next phase with NEPA. The team has looked at constructability issues, and I do not believe we found any major environmental constructability issues at the time, but I would advise against taking that statement too seriously, because the environmental assessment really comes during NEPA. And that's the next phase of the study.
Well, I was just generally speaking, I don't know all the tripwires in Virginia, the river, in the district. Just generally speaking, we haven't got that far. Is that what you're telling? Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions from any members of the board? Seeing none, as I said, this is certainly not the last conversation I think we'll be having here at the Finance Committee and on the Metro Board about this. I do think that the public engagement piece now is important. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's been a lot of media coverage. Certainly the notion of a Georgetown stop is getting a lot of attention, and I think some excitement out there. But we'll need to take that engagement, have some engagement with the elected officials, and then I think regroup a little bit and maybe look at ways to sort of, in my view, make this a little bit more workable, perhaps get some of the costs down and some of our estimates, but still accomplish some the goals that were identified. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks to the whole team for all the work on this so far.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. And with no further business to come before the Finance Committee, we are adjourned. I will turn it over to Mr. Drummer and the Safety and Operations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. So welcome to today's Safety and Operations Committee, and it is truly an honor for me to serve as the new chair. We have today's agenda before us. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Moving to our minutes, I trust that the committee has had an opportunity to review the minutes from our July 29th meeting. Unless there are any objections, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved. So we have one information update on today's agenda, and it's in 3 elements. A progress report on the status of remaining open issues with phase 2 of the Silver Line, an outline of the key issues that need to be addressed before Metro accepts the project, and an overview of Metro's progress on hiring and training staff to operate the new extension. I'll turn the floor over to Andy Off to begin today's discussion. Mr. Off?
Yes, sir. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Could you introduce yourself and your role for the new board members, please?
Yes, absolutely, sir. My name is Andy Off. I am the Executive Vice President for Capital Delivery. So I am responsible for delivering all of WMATA's major capital programs. As an example, the platform project that we just came out of between West Hyattsville and Greenbelt this past weekend. All right, and moving along to our Silver Line Phase 2 update. As Mr. Drummer noted, our agenda will just go through status on our open issues, the schedule, and then Mr. Leader, our COO, will talk through staffing updates. I did want to touch on one significant issue that has been successfully closed since we last met. We have replaced all the damaged direct fixation fasteners, roughly 15,000 of those, on the Phase 2 direct fixation guideway. So that's a good news story where we worked with WMATA and their contractor to identify the root cause and develop a remediation plan. So that is complete. Next, this slide, just as an overview, on the left-hand side, impacts to system performance demonstration. These, from our perspective, are known deficiencies that would impact MWA's ability to declare substantial completion. It does not account for any testing that is currently or actively underway. Those items in yellow, we have developed a solution. The item shown here is a UPS fan, the uninterruptible power supply for the traction power rooms in the yard. We had a similar challenge on the main line, same manufacturer, so we know what the fix is. We just need to get that implemented. And then we have no unresolved issues that would impact substantial completion. To the right are those items that we view would impact our ability to declare operational readiness. The item shown in red is noted as such because it is new. All the other items we've discussed in this forum. The turnback logic, that is a train control item. It was 4 locations, a total of about 4,000 feet across the 24 miles of new mainline track, where we identified an issue where we needed to reduce the speed command slightly to mitigate a potential safety hazard. MY and the contractor have agreed to make that fix, so we do have a good solution there, and we're moving ahead. Down below in the right-hand corner, bottom right-hand corner in blue, are 2 unresolved issues, both at the yard, the elevator machine room, which essentially boils down to code compliance challenges with access to equipment and some electrical code interpretations. We have our experts to include third parties involved, as does MWA, and we're continuing to work through that. The turntable deals with contract compliance issues, primarily in terms of gaps or leveling in these turntables, but we are working through those, but unfortunately do not have identified way ahead or solution at this point. Next, looking at the schedule. So what I'm going to talk about the next three slides is all within the context of the cooperative agreement between ourselves and MWA. The first major milestone is substantial completion. That is a milestone that is maintained between MWA and their contractor. We have no influence, other than, being good partners in declaring when that is. The Airports Authority still forecast fourth quarter of this calendar year as declaring substantial completion. They did start level F testing, which is a major milestone in which they're testing with trains, the train control system that did start on the 23rd of August and is going well as of reported yesterday. Once substantial completion is declared, we enter a undefined in time period called operational readiness testing. This is our opportunity to complete and witness and document all tests. There's approximately 100 per contract, being the yard and the mainline work that need to get done. Often you may see in various publications that this period is defined as 60 days, and that really has to do because MWA and their contractor, for the purposes of pricing, have assumed a 60-day period between substantial completion and operational readiness. But that is not defined in the cooperative agreement. And because it's condition-based, dependent upon how the testing transpires, we're often hesitant to, get too far out in front of a timeline for that event. Once WMATA declares operational readiness, we enter a 90-day period, and that 90 days is defined in the cooperative agreement, where we enter pre-revenue service activities. And this is really where Joe's team, we're moving into the yard, we're outfitting the kiosks with AEDs, we're updating signage, we're going through the massive challenge of assigning staff to operate and maintain the new yard and the new 24-mile of track. So that's what happens after the operational readiness date. And then, once we complete the 90-day pre-revenue activity, we open up for our customers on our revenue operations date. So just wanted to walk through that. I think where we're at today, we are comfortable with MWA's projection of substantial completion, before the end of this calendar year, most likely at some point in November. And myself and Joe and Teresa are certainly very engaged in coordinating, with the MWA team as we work through those timelines. And next, I will turn it over to Mr. Leader, who will talk with the team about staffing. Joe.
All right, thank you, Andy. Good morning, Mr. Drummer, our new chair of the Safety Operations Committee. Congratulations, and to the rest of the board members. Again, I am Joseph Leader, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer here at Washington Metro. And in my responsibility, I have all of operations. So bus services, rail services, Metro Access, the Metro Transit Police Department, and some smaller units that belong to me that help support the operation. That is the area of responsibility that I have. Next slide. Oh, no, stay there, Andy. Sorry. I didn't see you moved it. Here, this chart depicts where we are regarding onboarding new staff for Silver Line Phase 2. At this time, by the end of August, we anticipated onboarding about 118 new employees, but we finished out the month of August onboarding 154 employees. In the next 3 months, hiring will be accelerated as seen by this graph as we move towards filling a total of 468 positions to operate Silver Line Phase 2. Hiring is being coordinated by my staff, IBOP's Human Capital Group, and a third party hired to assist in fielding a large pool of candidates. Next slide. In this bar chart, you will see the breakdown of positions per division. The blue represents vacant positions and the orange color represents filled positions. As you can see, filled positions on the board today vary per division, and this is directly related to the training requirements that are involved for those positions. Onboarding these positions early, such as ATC, Traction Power, and the Metropolitan Transit Police Department, is important to ensure that we have sufficient time to properly train them. Next slide. Key to opening Silver Line Phase 2 was the manning and training needed to open a fourth console or ops channel inside the Rail Operations Control Center, which we call the ROC. In August, we successfully did so, training not only personnel inside the ROC, but all field personnel in rail services responsible for moving trains and maintaining the right-of-way. Also, new assets on Silver Line Phase 2 are brought on, as new assets are brought on board on Silver Line Phase 2, specific familiarization training is required. Currently, in ATC, traction power, elevator and escalator, and system maintenance, the Silver Line Phase 2 contractors are developing required training as per their contract. At this time, Metro is reviewing the training, and once approved, the contractor will train our in-house trainers. Once our in-house trainers are qualified, they will begin to train Metro frontline employees, and that is my update regarding hiring. And I guess Andy and I will take any questions.
Yes, thank you, Joe. And sir, back to you.
So thank you, Mr. Off and Mr. Leader, for the informative updates. If anyone has questions, you can raise your hand, or you can use the raise your hand feature. Mr. Boger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on being chair. Joe, it seems like we don't have an end date. So we're training all these people early, which I get, but what happens when we're not ready to go forward with operating the Silver Line? What happens to those employees? Do they just sit around or wait around, or what happens?
Well, this is it's been an issue that we've been dealing with MWA and keeping them on notice. That is extremely important that they come to us with a substantial completion date so we can. One of the things that's really important to keep in mind is that some of the lead times for training the employees takes time. First off, just hiring them can take months because they have to go through a background check followed by a medical. And then we have, once we bring them on board, then their training starts. So a Metro Transit police officer can take up to 10 months to actually train. So it's important, and we've been going through this over time. We have basically an agreement with MWA that if the state continues to go down and we have personnel on board, that they would be responsible for paying. I think we will continue to monitor substantial completion and where we feel we're going to be with ORD. If we think we can slow down the hiring, we will. But at this time, based on what we're hearing from MWA, we need to continue to bring people on board.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd also add, as we all know, the marketplace has changed dramatically in terms of recruitment, given the pandemic and just everything. So it's very important that we continue this process now so that we are ready to go when this thing is finished.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a follow-on question, if I may.
Absolutely.
Joe, are existing employees able to move up or laterally move into these new slots that you're creating, and the new employees, will they replace existing employees?
So when we eventually open up Silver Line Phase 2, it will be done through a pick process, which will be a system pick process. So there's actually two questions in the question you answered. Can people move up? Yes, because in the maintenance away area, we need not only just track repairmen, but AA, single A. So there are promotional opportunities going on right now within the existing workforce. So some of the new people coming in will fill the lower ranks. But yes, when we go to open up Silver Line Phase 2, it will be done through a pick process. So that means everybody has an opportunity to move there. We do not know what that's going to look like because Silver Line goes pretty far out, into Loudoun County. So we don't know if a lot of the new people will just have to pick there because nobody wants to go that far out. We just do not know until we have the first pick.
Thank you.
Mr. Letourneau?
Thank you. A couple of questions. One, I just want to sort of reiterate because it is an important point, and I know I've asked you this privately. I want to ask it in an open session here. We have seen some reports that Capital Rail Constructors, which is the main Silver Line contractor, is telling MWA that the substantial completion date would be something like May of 2022. MWA has stuck to the November, December, fourth quarter 21 substantial completion date. Just as of now, that's still our understanding, and that's what we're operating on, which is sometime fourth quarter 21, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay. Let me ask about the issue of connectivity between the phases, between phase 1 and phase 2, which, kind of the last time we did one of these in my very, very brief tenure as Safety and Operations Committee Chair, we were talking about how kind of the connection weekend didn't go that great. And there were some computer programming issues that need to be worked out, and that basically was going to sort of be up to the programmers at this point. Are we making progress on that? Do we have identified a future weekend to try this connection again? What can you tell us on that?
Yes, sir. We have identified potential future weekends. We're still working through a few of the details there. As we've progressed through level F testing, we have identified, had some good success, and we do feel confident that we've worked through the challenges we experienced in June, where we did have, less than ideal weekend where we did not complete some of the critical testing. But yes, sir, I mean, to answer your question, we do feel confident that a potential shutdown weekend in October, will produce a successful tie-in between phase 1 and phase 2.
Okay, that's good to hear. The other good thing is that the chart showing unresolved issues is slowly but surely becoming more sparse. But I kind of have to ask, so we have a few still listed. Do we think there are paths forward in a reasonable time frame on these two, the mostly yard issues at this point? Are we, what's sort of our thinking on how we get to moving these up into the underway category?
Yes, sir. So we are working, Joe and I meet with MWA twice a week, and these two items are often the two agenda items we spend some time working through. Just as an example, in the elevator machine room, it really has to do with potentially moving a non-load bearing CMU wall. So it's not a task that we believe is insurmountable. It's not a technology issue, thankfully, and it's not necessarily a structural issue. It's more of aesthetics and access. So we believe we can successfully work through that in a fashion that would not delay, the overall project. And same with the turntable. I mean, that has been a challenge, but every week we are making incremental progress. And we feel like we don't have the 100% solution, but we are making good progress.
Okay. It goes without saying, obviously, folks are very eager for this to get moving. So I appreciate all your work.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And I'll step in with one question and one comment first. Very impressive hiring production with regard to plan versus actual. And really appreciated the stratification of by function where you stand on hiring. Are there any vulnerabilities you have between now and substantial completion in hiring?
So far, so good. I mean, I know human capital is doing a great job. I think we're reaching further out into the marketplace. I think it has helped that there are a lot of people not working and maybe changing careers based on what they did prior to the pandemic. So right now, I think we feel comfortable that we'll be able to meet the target at 468. And again, I get daily updates from the human capital group, and they continue each week to bring on not only people for the Silver Line Phase 2, but also backfill the vacancies I have in the rest of the system. So I think we're looking pretty good.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, there is no further business to come before this committee, and we stand adjourned. This concludes today's public Metro Board meetings. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I'll turn the floor over to Chair Smedberg, who has a request for the board to convene an executive session.
Thank you, Colonel Drummer. I'm going to request a motion for executive session in accordance with the bylaws. I, Paul Smedberg, request that the Board of Directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions or the federal government, and F, safety and security matters where premature release would compromise public safety. A motion is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. And again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see the board in executive session.